For decades, one place on Earth was considered beyond the reach of any adversary, a fortress in the middle of the Indian Ocean, so remote, so fortified, so strategically positioned that attacking it was considered impossible. That place was Diego Garcia, and tonight, that illusion is gone. Iran just struck Diego Garcia with a missile launched from Iranian territory, a precision strike that traveled over 4,000 kilometers across open ocean and hit one of the most defended military installations on Earth. The number shaking every defense ministry from Washington to London to Berlin tonight is not the damage assessment. It is the distance. 4,000 kilometers, because if you understand what that number means, you understand that the map of global power was just redrawn in a single strike. This is not a regional story. This is not a Middle East story. This is a story about every nation on Earth that thought distance was a defense. It is not anymore. The conflict at the center of tonight's crisis is no longer simply the United States versus Iran and the Persian Gulf. It has expanded into something far larger and far more dangerous. This is now a confrontation between Iran and the entire Western security architecture. Every American base, every NATO ally, every European capital that hosted American infrastructure under the assumption that distance provided protection, that assumption is now dead. Here is what we know with certainty. Diego Garcia is not just another military base. It is the United States' ultimate forward operating platform in the Eastern Hemisphere. From its runways, B-2 Spirit stealth bombers can take off and strike targets across Asia and the Middle East without refueling. It serves as a hub for nuclear-powered submarines, intelligence collection, and logistics. It is the logistical spine of American power projection across half the planet. For years, the strategic calculation in Washington, Tel Aviv, and London was simple. Iran's maximum missile range was approximately 2,000 kilometers. That meant Iran could threaten its immediate neighbors. But Diego Garcia, Europe assumptions that are now completely obsolete. And the people who made those assumptions are now sitting in emergency briefings trying to explain how they got it so wrong. Think about what 4,000 kilometers actually means on a map. Tehran to London is approximately 4,500 kilometers. Tehran to Paris is slightly less. Tehran to Berlin, Rome, Madrid, all of them now fall within the theoretical strike envelope that Iran just validated with a live operational test. For the first time since the Cold War, every European capital must confront a reality that no defense planner has seriously modeled in decades. They can be hit directly, not as collateral damage, not as an accident, as a deliberate strategic target in retaliation for hosting American military infrastructure. The governments in Brussels, in Berlin, in Paris woke up this morning operating under one set of assumptions. They will go to bed tonight under a completely different set. And the emergency cabinet meetings already being convened across Europe are not about what happened in the Indian Ocean. They are about what it means for the soil those governments are responsible for protecting. Every defense minister on that continent is now doing the same calculation. What does our alliance with Washington actually cost us tonight? But before we go deeper into the geopolitical consequences, you need to understand the weapon itself, because the missile that struck Diego Garcia is not the story. The system that produced it is the story. For years, the dominant narrative in Western media was that Iran's missile program was being systematically degraded by sanctions and Israeli sabotage operations. Underground facilities destroyed. Scientists eliminated. Supply chains disrupted. That narrative was wrong. Iran was operating in a parallel reality, quietly constructing what intelligence analysts are now calling underground missile cities. Vast subterranean complexes housing missile systems, launch infrastructure, and production facilities that were invisible to satellite surveillance and immune to airstrikes. Western intelligence agencies consistently underestimated what was being built beneath the surface. And tonight, the product of that underground program hit a target in the middle of the Indian Ocean with precision that no one in Washington predicted was possible. Think about what that means for every intelligence assessment produced about Iran over the past decade. Every briefing that said Iran's capabilities were being degraded. Every report that described their program as limited. All of it was built on incomplete information. And the gap between what Western intelligence believed and what Iran actually built is now measured in 2,000 kilometers of additional missile range. That intelligence failure will be studied in military academies for decades. And it will reshape how every intelligence agency in the world approaches the question of what adversaries are capable of building when the world is not watching closely enough. And then there is the second revelation generating even more alarm in Western defense establishments. The F-35 Lightning II, America's most expensive and most advanced combat aircraft, designed from the ground up to be invisible to radar. The entire strategic logic of American air power in the modern era is built on the assumption that the F-35 cannot be tracked, cannot be targeted, and cannot be hit. That assumption has now been challenged in a way that demands a complete reassessment. Iran used infrared tracking systems that lock onto the heat signature of the engine exhaust, a method that does not trigger the aircraft's radar warning systems. The F-35 never knows it is being tracked, and by the time it knows it is being targeted, it is already too late. The crown jewel of American air power has a vulnerability, and Iran has demonstrated that it knows exactly where that vulnerability is. Every F-35 pilot flying missions over. Iran right now is operating with a threat profile that did not exist in their briefings 48 hours ago. This is what makes tonight's developments so strategically significant. Iran has not simply acquired a new weapon. They have built a comprehensive intelligence and targeting network specifically engineered to nullify America's most expensive technological advantages. Longer-range missiles to threaten distant sanctuaries, infrared targeting to defeat stealth aircraft, underground storage to survive preemptive strikes. Together, they represent a systematic dismantling of the strategic assumptions that have underpinned Western military superiority for 3 decades. Now let me show you the economic dimension of this crisis. Because what is happening in financial markets and energy markets right now is not abstract. It is landing in your energy bill, your grocery prices, and your government's fiscal calculations within weeks, not months. The Strait of Hormuz carries 20% of the world's entire petroleum supply through a narrow corridor every single day. For decades, the United States Navy guaranteed the security of that corridor. That guarantee depended entirely on the assumption that American military assets in the region were safe from Iranian retaliation. That assumption no longer holds. Now that Iran has demonstrated the ability to strike Diego Garcia at 4,000 kilometers, the calculus of American naval protection has fundamentally changed, and the United States government has already taken a step that would have been unthinkable 3 weeks ago. It quietly lifted sanctions on Iranian oil. The country that spent years building the most comprehensive sanctions regime in modern history just removed the restrictions on Iranian petroleum exports. Why? Because the alternative was worse. With the Strait of Hormuz becoming a genuinely contested zone, keeping Iranian crude off the market would have triggered a price shock that no Western economy could absorb. The sanctions relief is not a policy preference. It is an emergency economic stabilization measure taken under strategic duress. And every adversary watching from Beijing to Moscow just learned something critically important. American sanctions are a pressure tool that can be reversed under sufficient military pressure. That lesson will shape the behavior of every sanctioned nation on Earth for the next decade. Iran just proved that building sufficient military capability is the path to sanctions relief. Not negotiation, not compliance. Capability. Consider what this means for the average family in Canada, in Germany, in Japan. The era of cheap, stable energy from the Gulf is over. The permanent risk premium now built into every barrel of oil will be felt at every gas station, in every heating bill, and in the price of every manufactured product. That is every product that exists. The economic blast radius of what happened in the Indian Ocean tonight extends into every household on Earth, and it will not disappear when the shooting stops. It is structural. It is permanent. And it starts now. For the families in the Gulf who have lived under the security umbrella of American naval power for decades, tonight's developments represent something deeply unsettling. The invisible guarantee that kept shipping lanes open and energy supplies stable is no longer unconditional. For the sailors aboard American warships in the Arabian Sea, the knowledge that Iran can now reach Diego Garcia changes the threat environment in ways that no briefing fully captures. And for the defense ministers across Europe sitting in emergency sessions right now, the question on the table is one that this continent has not seriously debated since 1991. How do we defend ourselves if the American security guarantee has limits that Iran just found? The United States has signaled its intention to withdraw from the region. The official language is that objectives have been met. The strategic subtext is far less comfortable. Prolonged engagement with an Iran that can strike at will across 4,000 kilometers, that can track F-35s with infrared systems, and that has hardened its missile infrastructure in underground facilities that survived 3 weeks of intense airstrikes, is a recipe for a war of attrition that the American public has no appetite for. And when a superpower withdraws, someone fills the vacuum. China is already filling it. As American sanctions on Iranian oil are lifted and as U.S. military presence in the Gulf begins to contract, China is deepening its economic relationships with Tehran, securing discounted crude that is now flowing freely, expanding trade relationships with Gulf states that are increasingly uncertain about Washington's reliability as a security partner. Russia is watching with considerable satisfaction as American attention and resources are consumed by a Middle East conflict that eases pressure on its own operations in Ukraine. The geopolitical beneficiaries of tonight's strike on Diego Garcia are not in the Middle East. They are in Beijing and Moscow, and both capitals understand exactly what just happened. There's a question that every European government must now answer, and the answer will define European security policy for the next generation. Is the infrastructure on your soil worth the risk of being a direct target for a power that just proved it can reach you? The United Kingdom expanded military basing rights for the United States just days before Iran struck Diego Garcia. Tehran's warning was immediate and explicit. Those bases are now targets, and that warning was validated within days. Every European leader watching tonight understands the message: host American military infrastructure and accept that you have become a direct participant in a conflict with a power that can now reach your capital city. The transatlantic alliance was built on the premise that European nations could host American power with relative impunity. That premise is now dead, and the consequences will be felt in defense budget negotiations, in NATO planning sessions, and in the private conversations between European leaders who are now asking whether the alliance as currently structured still serves their national interests. The debate that was always theoretical is now operational, and it will reshape European politics for a generation. Every defense spending decision made in Paris, Berlin, and Warsaw for the next 20 years will be made in the shadow of what Iran demonstrated tonight. Now let me show you where this goes. Because we are not looking at the end of a conflict. We are looking at the beginning of a new form of strategic stalemate. Iran's demands are not tactical. They are structural. The removal of American military bases from the region, compensation for the economic damage caused by years of sanctions, recognition of Iran as a legitimate regional power with a sphere of influence that Western powers must accept. For the United States, agreeing to these terms would represent the most significant geopolitical retreat since the fall of Saigon in 1975, a signal to every ally around the world that the American security guarantee has conditions, limits, and breaking points. For Iran, this is not about ending the current fight. It is about rewriting the rules of an entire region. The missile that hit Diego Garcia was a message, but the underground infrastructure that produced it is the real story. Iran has built a deterrent, not a bluff, not a negotiating position, a genuine operational capability that makes the cost of sustained confrontation prohibitively high for the most powerful military alliance in history. And the terms of any agreement reached in the coming days will reflect that reality whether Washington acknowledges it publicly or not. The next 72 hours will be shaped by negotiations conducted under the shadow of this new reality. Trump has signaled willingness to talk. Iran's interim leadership has signaled willingness to negotiate. But every concession the United States makes from this point forward will be made under the implicit threat that the alternative is a conflict with a power that can hit Diego Garcia, track F-35s, and place every European capital within its strike envelope. That is not negotiation from a position of strength. That is negotiation from a position of demonstrated mutual vulnerability. And the entire world is watching to see which side blinks first. What we know tonight is this. Iran struck Diego Garcia at 4,000 kilometers. The concept of sanctuary is gone. The F-35's stealth advantage has a documented vulnerability that Iran knows how to exploit. Underground missile cities survived 3 weeks of American airstrikes completely intact. The United States lifted sanctions on Iranian oil under economic duress. Europe is now within theoretical strike range for the first time since the Cold War. China and Russia are the strategic beneficiaries of every day this conflict continues, and the permanent risk premium now embedded in global energy markets will be felt by ordinary families from Ottawa to Tokyo to Berlin for years to come. The negotiations that will determine the shape of the next decade are beginning in the shadow of a capability that the Western world spent years telling itself did not exist. The sanctuaries are gone. The safe zones have been eliminated, and the map of global power, drawn with such confidence in Washington and Brussels for 30 years, has been redrawn tonight by a single missile launched from the underground cities beneath the Iranian plateau. What happens next will not be decided on a battlefield. It will be decided in rooms where leaders who thought they had all the advantages are now learning, for the first time, what it feels like to have none. The world that existed before this missile was launched will not return. The assumptions are shattered. The distances that protected the powerful are gone. Every government on Earth woke up this morning in one reality and will go to sleep tonight in another. The strategic map that generals studied, that diplomats negotiated around, and that intelligence agencies built their careers defending has been invalidated in a single flight across the Indian Ocean. The era in which major powers could project force without consequence, could sanction without retaliation, and could build bases beyond the reach of adversaries is over. What replaces it is a world where the calculus of risk has been permanently reset, where the strong are no longer untouchable, and where the assumption of safety that has underwritten Western foreign policy for 3 decades has been exposed as exactly what it always was, an assumption. The only question that remains is whether the people making decisions in Washington, in Brussels, and in every allied capital understand the true magnitude of what just changed tonight. History suggests they rarely do in time, and history also suggests that the cost of that failure to understand arrives faster and harder than anyone expects. The clock is already running.